about stuff that's going on in a less formal setting, right? Those kind of ceremonies that you get in an office, we've had to be more thoughtful about essentially engineering replacements for those experiences, right? Like we have brown bag lunches where you kind of randomly get assigned to somebody else. We're doing this with a couple of teams, or you might just reach out to somebody that you never have contact with, and you say, "Hey, let's just have lunch together over Teams." We use Teams instead of Zoom for a lot of our internal communication. As an example, or we might have more formal methods for forcing the kind of communication that you might have as a natural outcome of being in the same space. So that's kind of been one of the biggest challenges. When we say remote first, what that means is we figure out how people need to work together or what systems people need to use, and we make sure those systems work well for everybody, for remote people. And then if there happens to be some benefit for people in a local office, that works fine too. But that's kind of secondary to solving the underlying problem. And using that as kind of a problem solving tool, essentially assuming everybody is remote first, has been a kind of a good way to lead into the process, of making sure that everybody can work together. I think the other big thing is, and I'm sure everybody on this call is experiencing it, is you do get a little overwhelmed with remote meetings towards the end of the day, and you hear a little bit of that. You hear a little bit of that frustration too. Sometimes people will maybe not necessarily hide, but they'll be like, "I'm working and I just kind of want to finish work," and so getting people's attention, especially like in an office, again, you can just walk over to somebody's cube or somebody's office and say, "Hey, do you have a second?" And again, we try to install norms that everybody agrees to say, "Hey, if it's really urgent, don't be afraid to still pick up a phone." And, if instead of waiting for somebody to become available on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever. So that's kind of been the second big thing. And then other than that, I think Kim said it well, making sure people understand that, we get that working from home is different from working in the office, and to accommodate that people have their families in that space, or that it's a personal space. Sometimes people are working in their kitchen table and not in a beautiful office, and being accommodating of the realities of life has been a big part of that as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Jeff, want to share some of the challenges with Cloud Checker?
Sure. Yeah. You guys have said it well. I'll just briefly say that one of our biggest issues, I think, is that we're very task and project oriented when we're working remote, because we're not used to it. We're not remote first. We had been in person first. And so we're getting stuff done, which feels great. It's not enough. It's not enough just to get your work done. And what's missing is those, the company meetings, which we've tried to now hold virtually. We've had virtual happy hours, and all the teams have, most of them have check-ins in the morning just to say hi and not try to get anything done, just to make sure that there's that shared optimism of the future, that we're all, we're not going to go in a downward spiral in our own heads, that there is life after this, and we're all working together on that. So I think we've made space for that. I think it's been successful, but it's a challenge.
Great. Thank you so much. We do have some great questions coming in from our audience members. So we'll start off with a question from Dave. Dave, thank you so much. Going back to Kim, do your companies have official policies around telecommuting, either in place before this or that you have put in place since mid-March? Oh, Kim, unmuting you here.
There we go. Got it. Sorry, I had Shannon mute me because my neighbors started mowing their lawn outside. And even though I told my kids to be careful making their lunch, they're making a lot of noise in the background. So working from home. So yeah, can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Sure. Does Dixon have official policies around telecommuting either in place before or that you have put in place?
We did have work from home policies as it related to use of technology. So it was kind of surface, not very in depth about our expectations. And it was more just to we're in the middle of getting NIST certified, and there are some requirements around NIST certification to around work from home policies and the use of your technology outside of your own workspace. But since then, since mid-March, we have worked to really elevate that work from home policy and build much more rigor into it. And we continue to do that. It will be an evolving document. And there's going to be just deeper policies created. We have a return to work team that's in place right now. And we're looking at lots of different areas of the business, including what New York State is requiring of us to get back into our workspace eventually. We're telling our team members there's no expectation that we'll be back in the office until August or September, because if it can't feel like the office, why put people in an uncomfortable situation? You know, not all of us will be there. It's going to be very different. We won't be using conference rooms. So until we can get closer to it feeling like an office, we won't be there. And so this return to work team is building policies around that, and a stronger return or remote work policy is being built as well.
Great, thanks so much. I'll go to Jonathan. Does ITX have official policies around telecommuting or work from home?
Yeah, we do. It kind of falls into two places. One was the position. There were a few positions that we still preferred to have from the office, typically because they had to deal with, and in many cases because they had to deal with physical artifacts. So for instance, our accounting team was still primarily a work from office role, although even that was a pretty easy transition. Somebody just goes in right now to grab the mail and bring it home to get it processed. So for those few positions that were related to, like, our office manager or something, to the physical location, working from home either regularly or part-time was just something they needed to get approval from their supervisor. In the rest of the cases, typically people were hired with an expectation that they would either work from home or they would elect to work from the office for a certain number of days. And once people were 3 or more days in the office, then they would get resources assigned to them. That was primarily the policy. What was driving the policy was how we were allocating resources and space. Other than that, we had some policies around technology. Our security model really was driving work from home versus work from office. So we had constructed a policy to essentially say, even at the offices, people look like they're working from home. So whenever we would evaluate systems or implement a new environment, we would do that with the assumption that it didn't matter if you were in the office or at home. So we really got lucky. We force implemented our team to move our PBX out into the cloud literally a month and a half before the beginning of the pandemic. And we really got lucky that we did, because that simplified the last couple of days of move. Essentially, we said, just take your laptop home and make sure you have your power adapter with you.
Great, thanks so much. Jeff, on to you. Policies?
Yeah, we're light on policies at Cloud Checker. I'll try to go quickly. I know a lot of questions coming in. We don't need a lot of policies. It's fine. If people want to work from home, we're pretty much okay with it. We have individuals that can't for some reason, and that's okay too. We're not going to be prescriptive about people needing to be back in the office. We're not going to even allow it until September. Like, we're fine. I don't think it needs to be heavily regulated. We're kind of a small company.
Great, thanks so much. Great questions coming in. I'm going to turn this over to any of our panelists that would like to jump in. We're not going to have to go in order. So any advice to those working from home with children and balancing work, life, and homeschooling? I know, Jonathan, you've been doing this for quite some time. The others, I know Kim's mentioned, lunches, lots of chaos. So any advice for that balance?
I've got something. My wife and I have started this. So we have children that are like 11 and 13. The 11-year-old is not as independent as our 13-year-old. So we do Post-its for her in the morning and put them on like the shutters of one of our rooms. So she will take something from the Post-it, do it, get the next Post-it. It keeps her sort of on track as my wife and I are both working. That's been I can't imagine doing that for a 2-year-old, but for an 11-year-old, it seems to work out okay.
My kids are similar ages, and so we just built structure right from day one. So for them, it was school is going to be during the same hours that you're in the building at school. So it's 9 to 3, and we have one computer. We're in Victor School Central School District. They are not a Chromebook district, so technology was not sent home with the kids. We have one floating family laptop, so they alternate it every hour, and that other hour they have to do another subject. And art class is baked in. They get an hour for lunch, which is what's happening right now, and they'll sit and watch TV. They have to do gym or physical education outside. And that's worked out pretty well, that structure, I say, and sort of defining and boxing in for them what each hour of the day is going to look like has helped us. Again, with small children, much harder to do, but our experiences with those older kids too.
Yeah, I've been lucky enough. We're in a similar position. Our kids are a little older, but we've been encouraging our management team to recognize that their folks with younger kids are going to have a harder time dealing with that. And what we've seen is a lot more flexing in terms of time sharing. So employees that are co-parenting smaller children, especially, are looking at shifting their hours. So we see them come on at 4 in the evening and working until later. Essentially, parents are taking shifts in some cases, or we've got another one where their parents are trying to coordinate 2 hours on, 2 hours off to try to manage that, and that seems to be able to mitigate. So biggest thing is be flexible and have open lines of communication, especially with your employees, so that people know what to expect, and to be I guess be empathetic as much as possible, that people have to deal with their lives, and be good parents to their children.
That's great advice. Yeah.
Well said, Jonathan. Actually, if I could just jump in there, we
Yeah.
have sort of an unofficial policy on this too. I feel like everybody gets a free pass during COVID. Like, people are going to react to stress in different ways. People are sometimes out of character, out of sorts. I think it's, you got to give them a little slack. So we try to.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you guys so much. And that sort of leads us into our next question. With regard to managing employees, can you share some best practices for managing those remote employees, balancing micromanagement and, just being completely hands off? And anybody can start if you'd like.
Sure. I've got something on this one then. What we try to do is define the role in advance to the point where the same management practices would work regardless if they're in person or not. If you feel like you have to manage differently when they're remote, they may not have the right cadence for one-on-ones, or the right goals in their HRIS system, or criteria for MBOs set up anyway. We try to push all that there's like sort of standard for operating, and as a result, we're just sort of doing the same thing, doing the same motions remotely. So it hasn't really changed. We haven't noticed a shift to micromanagement. I think that's probably also the type of people we hire are either managers themselves or individual contributors at a pretty high level, and that may not work for every type of role. I understand.
Yeah, from our perspective, we've just made sure that managers are available and in touch. And again, that's more from a checking in on what do you need, how are you doing perspective. But as it relates to managing the day-to-day work, we have a really empowered workforce, and there's high level, we're a very high trust organization. So our assumption is the team is doing their work and they're not sloughing off. And we have, we're a service industry business, right? We have client work and deadlines and project tasks that need to get completed. It's easy to see if something's off track, but for the most part, we've experienced very high levels of productivity. There's been no need to even cross the barrier of micromanagement, but it's more important that we're in touch with them regularly. The managing partners, the leadership team is making weekly calls to 100% of our staff. We split up the list, and it's just how are things going? What do you need? Lauren Dixon herself ran a printer and copier paper in someone's office plant directly to their home one week. So we're willing to do whatever it takes.
Great.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Those are both great. Having a good way to measure your employees' productivity other than that they're keeping a seat warm is the key.
Sure. Great. Excellent. We're going to go to a question that sort of combines a few different ones. You've mentioned a few different tools. Obviously, we're using Zoom here. The Chamber has adopted a number of new platforms. But can you share just maybe some of the tools that you're using to help manage productivity and to connect your teams? We had a question from Brock Fresher, with the Zoom online. Do you have any tips, any best practices for using these tools?
Sure, I can give you something. I think I mentioned it to some of the panelists before we started, but I I collect, this is the hotel from The Shining behind me. Kind of represents how I feel most days. I collect these backgrounds for Zoom, and we use Zoom internally, so I like switching them up every once in a while. I won't annoy you with my more annoying backgrounds right now, but I like that. I think other people tend to appreciate it too. We have a Slack-based communication workforce. We probably do 10 times as much Slack as email. That plus email plus the normal sort of business tools we use, whether they're software development tools or other, just they're all accessible over the internet. So kind of makes sense for a cloud company like CloudCheckr, but for us, it's a natural motion.
Great, thank you. Kim or Jonathan?
Yeah, I can say a lot of our collaboration is really centered around Office 365 as our kind of our primary tool, and that gives us Teams and Exchange and SharePoint and a lot of the other tools in the Microsoft suite. And then each of our individual teams may have specific tools. For those people who are listening who are trying to figure out how to do whiteboarding, for instance, we use Miro, which is has been shockingly good. We just got a collaboration board that we built. Announced, I think they announced it today, is one of the top 50 that was submitted. We've been doing a lot of stuff with that. So Miro is really good. I'm sure people are familiar with Trello, for instance, as a way to kind of keep your teams on track. To a certain extent, especially at the team level, we like to let our teams kind of work their own tools if they don't subvert the organizational tools. So we don't, we're using Exchange, so people aren't using Gmail, for instance. Other than that, I think I want to speak more to the other question. When you're using tools remotely, it's really important to set norms with your team about how you're going to use those tools, and to support your team that way. So for instance, we have some norms around communication. So we'll say, communicate in urgency in real time. And so, that means don't use email or Slack or Teams, for instance. When something's important, you still pick up the phone, even though you're not in the same office. You pick up the phone and you call. If it's not urgent, then some asynchronous mode is a good way to do that. So that's one norm. Teams will oftentimes set their own norms. Like if you're not in a stand-up and people are actually working productively, then don't. So people will say, well, expect maybe a 15-minute response time, or I deal with my emails during this time of the day or whatever. And if you set those norms and expectations with your team, then they'll know how to deal with escalating stuff when you're not in the office and they can't just walk up to your cube or walk up to your office to ask questions.
Great, thanks so much. Kim, want to weigh in? I'm curious, Kim, because you guys at Dixon do so much creative work. How have you tried to mimic, just the energy of getting people in a room? I'm sure that must be tough.
I think that was one of the biggest sources of trepidation going into this. Is in our business, it's so important for that creative energy to flow and to be in the room together, to be able to brainstorm and idea share. But we have had two very important campaigns that have been created in COVID times since March, very quick campaigns, some that expedited their timeline. And I got to tell you, it's some of our best work. So the team is figuring out how to get it done. They're figuring out how to collaborate and how to come together, and they're not doing it in person. It's done over, we use Office 365 as well. We're leaning in heavily on Teams. The only time we're using Zoom is when we do our Wednesday meetings where we have all 100 of our employees come together, normally in our lobby, but we're doing it on Zoom just because Teams only allows, they changed it to a gallery of 9 photos. But we really want to see everybody's faces, so we're leaning into Zoom there. But I'm really proud of the way the team has figured it out, because in this industry, you would expect that it would be tricky to create in the way that we're typically used to creating. But I know some people on this call have seen some of the work that I'm talking about, and it's pretty incredible what can be created from afar.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you so much. Moving on to another audience question here. Does anyone have best practices for interviewing and onboarding new employees virtually?
That is a great question. We had one new employee start 2 weeks into COVID. And our vice president of people and development handled that start to finish. So I wasn't intimately involved with the details of how it worked, but I know it was a little tricky, but I've spoken to this woman who joined us and she said she feels like part of the family. She was able to pick up all of the things that she needed in our vestibule. And we always do a nice welcome basket for employees. It just kind of starts to get you tapped into our culture and what we're all about. We did a round of calls to her to welcome her and gave her some good exposure during that agency meeting. So I think it's about trying to do the things that you normally do, but just remotely, introducing the person, getting them acquainted with their team. You can't walk them around or tour the office, but there's virtual tours. We happen to have some virtual shots of the agency that we can kind of show her around that way. And I know our vice president of people and development utilized some of that. As it relates to hiring, I know we're doing that too. We do have a couple of open positions and we're actively interviewing and pursuing and making good use of software there, making sure that we're weeding through resumes in our typical HR software, which is Paylocity, and working with management to be able to filter through the team members that they want to take a look at versus those that they are interested in maybe aren't the best fit for the organization. So we're muddling through it. I think the best advice I could give is try to replicate the structure that you had in place before to the best that you can.
Great, thank you. Jeff or Jonathan, want to add to that?
Well said.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Kim, that's rock on. That was solid.
Great.
I actually like your idea of the welcome basket too. I'm gonna steal that.
Go for it.
Great idea.
All yours.
Awesome, excellent. All right, now this is a little bit more of a community question. Obviously, with everyone working remotely, some inequities have been exposed in our community. So do you panelists have any suggestions for improving internet broadband access for our community and handling what is called the digital divide?
I don't think this is a new problem. This problem, to be honest, was solved back in the 30s and 40s with the foundations of original telecommunications, right? And the FCC was put together to ensure that everybody had access to telephones. And the same kind of thing happened when we had to ensure access to electrical infrastructure. I know that sometimes this is politicized, but if we believe that access to the internet is just as important as access to other forms of telecommunications, then we have to find a way to. If it's important, you need to speak to your legislator about making it a part of our system of utilities that everybody gets access to.
Right.
We as Americans, we've solved this before.
Yeah, actually, I did a little research on this a long time ago, but New York State has a pretty good program on this. New York State has a broadband initiative that funds $4 to $5 for CapEx build-outs of fiber networks right now, and to rural communities especially. It's not profitable to build a long string of fiber at $17,000 a mile when you're not going to recover that investment for 30 years. So New York State is funding that with tax dollars. I don't know where the source is, but the governor has an initiative, and it is well funded, and money's going out. So it seems like a worthwhile thing.
Yeah, there's actually some really interesting stuff going on right now as well. The community libraries oftentimes are a good example of a place where people are getting access to broadband when they need it for shorter periods of time. So I've seen a few examples of that, in especially in towns that are more rural, where people will gather in the parking lot of the local library and use the broadband that's available there. So support your libraries too.
I'd be interested, by the way, if anybody knows of any charities that are trying to provide, if the only issue is not access but cost, if there are charities that try to provide broadband for folks that need it and that can't afford it, that might be a good thing to share. I'd love to hear about it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, guys. All right, so we have a question specifically for Jonathan here. I know that you guys do have an office in downtown now. So what sort of resources do people have in the office versus what they have at home? What sort of differences are there in those environments?
from my perspective, in terms of what we issue for resources, I presume that's what the person was asking. The best answer I can say is when we really committed to remote first, standardization was the policy. So essentially everybody got a laptop, and everybody who is in the same role gets the same laptop. So um, we gave them a choice of a Mac or an equivalent Windows machine. So that was, there was some choice, but there were no desktops issued, which was really helpful when we had to send everybody home. The only big distinction was if someone was electing to work from home more than 60% of the time, then the displays and, mouse and keyboard and stuff that was a little bit more personal, we would ship to their home so that they would use it from their home office instead of having it delivered to the office to be put on a desk. So when people would come into the office to work, for 1 or 2 days, they would have to sit in one of our hoteling space and either use a shared monitor or whatever. But again, foundationally, it was try to be standard, and the standards were driven from the assumption that everybody was remote.
Great, excellent. So here's a question that Kim touched on a little bit with the return to work strategy. So have you started planning or thinking about a return to work strategy? Kim mentioned yes. And then I'll add on to this question too. How do you think your workplace will change? What aspects of this remote environment do you plan on continuing when this crisis is over or mostly over?
I can keep going with our return to work strategy. Again, being very people first and people centric, where we started was with an all employee survey. And we have been sharing that out to those in the business community. So I can share it with the chamber if they want to push the survey instrument out, and people can kind of adopt it as they see fit for their organization. But we wanted to understand the comfort level of our team returning, knowing that the phased approach was coming and looming on May 15th, knowing we knew we weren't going to be phase one, but were we going to be ready to come back phase two? Were people going to be ready to come back? And we sent this survey out, and 89% of our team members, and we had 100% participation, said they were anxious about coming back in the office. They weren't ready. They were concerned about bringing the virus into their household and spreading that risk circle, if you will, when they step out of their own comfort zone and go into another space. What happens then, and what are they bringing back to their families? And there was a lot of concern, like I said, about the office not feeling like the office. So we used the foundation and the data from that survey to kind of drive our planning in concert with the New York State Forward template that has been developed. And that's where it gets tricky. That template really does show you how much needs to change in your workspace, and there's a cost associated with it. So people being first and foremost, that's always the case. But when you start to think about the things that you're going to need to do to your office to get ready for people to come back in and for visitors to come back in, there's a pretty good expense that's associated with that. So all things considered, working from home from right now is working really well. And so it just does not make sense to make people uncomfortable in our space and for the business to take that on. How we start moving back to work, the team is planning for that, and it's going to be slow and calculated, and we will change our workspace. We're going to make sure that the desks are separated the way that they need to, that we're being mindful of how we're gathering people, but we're going to follow the lead of the government regulations and those that are advising us.
Yeah, well said. I think that's almost exactly what I was going to say, that we are, I can't imagine forcing somebody to come into the office after this is over. We're certainly not going to be the first. We're going to be lagging everybody else. And if somebody really wants to come in and it's technically allowed, we won't make a stink about it, and we won't make a stink if they don't want to. I do not want to put up plexiglass between people. I don't want to, triple the size of our office space to allow that kind of density change. It's just, if folks that really, there is a percentage that's going to need to and want to come in on a regular basis, absolutely, we'll find a way to accommodate. We're not going to force it. Anybody that wants to stay at home should.
Yeah. The one thing we've been asking ourselves is we've been really focusing on the value that the office brings, and being thoughtful about those resources first. So, that necessarily isn't our employees working together, but rather, are there circumstances where it makes sense to bring a client in and use the conference spaces and things like that? So we're thinking of it more from a value perspective than just a return to normal perspective.
Great. Thanks so much. I have a question for the group. We had a question about interviewing and onboarding, and one of the reasons that's always cited as far as a remote first and remote mentality is that you can source talent from a very large pool. You're not constrained to your geographic area. So a question for maybe Jeff and Kim: would you, going forward, consider hiring someone to your company who is not Rochester based and that you may never actually physically have in your office?
100% yes, especially in our industry. We're seeing, and the expectation is, and not that this is good news by any stretch of the imagination, because nobody wants to see this, but there will be a consolidation of firms just like ours, which means there's going to be talent out there and available to us. And if we can access some of the top talent in our industry, why would we box ourselves into making them have to be in our space with us? So we are 100% open-minded to bringing on a workforce that is remote.
Yeah. I feel the same way. We've always sort of had that openness, but I'll say that it's increased. We have 20 people and 30 people in South America now. So we've got a widely distributed workforce regardless. Today, a lot of our competitors are not doing as well as we are. And I think in other industries, they're going to start to see that same pain. So we've been snapping them up, and we'll continue to do so. I've always felt a little bad about this as a Rochester promoter because I want folks to be hired here first, and we certainly would love that. We've hired several from Rochester in the last 2 months, in fact. But I'll say it's not limited that way. It does create opportunities for Rochesterians, though, to go work for Amazon from Rochester. You don't have to live in Seattle to get that job.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that actually as a net benefits Rochester more than it hurts. Yes, some companies here are going to source outside. Some people here are going to go work outside. And I think remote workers with the quality of life that we offer is, well, I guess I'm talking more about the GRE talk angle, but like we're a great destination for life. And I think that will benefit us overall.
Right. You can work anywhere, live in Rochester.
Right?
Yeah.
Sounds like a tagline.
I'd add a word of caution to the move of allowing people to work from home or allowing people to work remotely. We've even seen it in the past in our organization where like everybody in the sales team but one is in the office, and sometimes you can get some weird class problems where the one person who's remote doesn't have access from a culture perspective, right? So that's something that you have to be thoughtful about as well when you're setting your norms around communication. And it's the little subtle things like I've always been a telecommuter. So even when we'd have an office, a conference in the office, I would attend remotely, and I'll sign in and people are laughing and having, conversations. And I'm like, did I miss something? Right. Or I'll hear as I'm signing off, let's talk about such, and then I'm signing off and I missed that as well. And you have to be very intentional about ensuring that those people who are not locally present aren't missing out because they'll leave. And if they're really great talent, you'll lose them. So you want to think about how your culture is inclusive of those are the people, and that you don't create a second class of people that are, the remotes, right? So
That's such a great point, Jonathan. I mentioned the woman who's working for us from Nashville, and it is like Christmas morning to her right now with this everybody being remote, because she was experiencing the exact same things you're talking about. She's like, all of a sudden everybody's using video. Guess what, guys? It's always been there, but nobody's been calling me on video, you know?
Exactly.
So she's loving it. And so I think that your advice is really, really well taken.
Thanks.
Great. Perfect. So I'd like to ask you all, obviously, Jonathan, you guys have been doing this for quite some time, so you've experienced some of these benefits, but what has been maybe the most surprising thing to you during this remote experiment? Surprising benefit, maybe that you wouldn't think of.
Can I share something that I discovered a number of years ago?
Sure.
So I'm not exactly an environmentalist, but I like the outdoors. I spend a lot of time camping, and I'm involved with scouts and stuff. And I decided to run the numbers, and I was shocked at how many tons of pollution were not produced by our team by not asking them to take the average commute to and from work. And I know we don't always think about like those other side benefits that don't have anything to do with our business, but there are a lot of really other interesting benefits. You are keeping people off the road. People who work from home get maybe an extra hour or two a day to exercise or to spend time with their family. The number of people who are sick from not getting sick from their coworkers drops significantly, so your employees' health goes up. There's a lot of really subtle benefits that you don't see, but that your employees get from having access to that as a choice. And sometimes they outweigh the benefits that you get from working in the office, and sometimes they don't. But it's neat to just kind of think like, hey, yeah, this guy's a little cleaner because we've got 250 people that don't drive to work every day.
Absolutely. That's great. Kim,
Can't
or
follow
Jeff,
that up.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's amazing. I can't follow that up. That was a really great sentiment.
Thank you.
Excellent. Jeff, anything surprising that has come out of this? You mentioned productivity actually going up.
Yeah, that was a shock. I had no expectation that we would end up doing more work per day, per unit, if you will. We are. I don't know that that's a great long-term thing. And so one of the challenges we're going to have now is, yes, you feel free to work from home. You should not feel compelled to work 18 hours a day. And if you do, for the long term, you'll just burn out and we'll lose the talent. We don't want to do that. It's not good for me. Like, I'm working too much too. Like, I need to take out at 3 o'clock and go for a walk with the dog. It just has to happen for that balance. So I think there's some new skills that we'll have to develop as managers to make sure that our teams have a nice balance in their life. I don't just mean like 8-hour days. I'm talking about like the normal healthy balance of where your mental space is, that shared optimism for the future.
Sure. Great. Thanks so much. I want to get to just some questions we had about headsets. So if anybody's a technical wizard, we had a couple of those. Any issues on audio with Office 365 Teams with headsets on? And then also recommendation for a best headset for phone calls as everybody's trying to adapt their technology.
I can answer the second one. Wired headsets are always better than wireless headsets for quality, generally speaking. But I'd probably look to, Kim, you guys probably, since you got dropped into 365 using it, you probably weren't as gently introduced. What have you guys seen for audio quality with Teams?
People on headsets are much more clear. Of course, wired and corded headsets, much more clear. We haven't had too many audio issues. There was a couple of, there was some trickiness with switching over from using the headset to non-headset, and just the settings that you have to fix every time you switch back and forth. That's a little bit annoying. But once you set the default, the computer understands what you're doing each and every time. But there were people who were jumping from Zoom to GoToMeeting to Teams and having to click these settings for audio off and on and off and on. But other than that, it's been people who are wearing their corded headsets sound the best. Their audio is the clearest. But I would say a majority of us are just not using that. I have to, because you hear the traffic, like I said, in my house behind me. And it's worse if I don't have my headsets in. But that's what I would say.
Yeah. It's for a specific brand. I have a Sennheiser USB PC something. It's like $35. I use it for recording a podcast as well, and I've gotten really good response on that. But I swear by corded headsets. That's probably the biggest rule.
I'll add one counterculture comment then, because my experience has been a little different. I bought every headset I could. I've got these AirPod Pros next to me that I don't use anymore. The best audio quality, according to others, is what I'm doing right now. Speakerphone, also, like mode on my MacBook Pro. I know it doesn't work this way on a PC, but on MacBook Pro, for some reason, the mic and the speakers they work well together, and everybody seems to say I sound okay. So
Great advice. Got to get down to those nitty-gritty details. I love it. Well, we're coming to the end of the hour, so I just wanted to, maybe we'll start back with Kim. Any final thoughts on this topic or just on our current situation in general?
I saw a comment come by about wanting to hear more about culture and keeping culture alive. So I'll just close with, again, being such a culture-centric organization, that's something that we've been really intent on. And we have made sure that we kept the norms that we could keep. So like I said, that agency meeting that happens every Wednesday, right from the jump, we were having an all-team meeting every Wednesday at 8:30, just like we always did. We were making sure that supervisors and their leadership was checking in with their teams on a regular basis. We started a website called The Good Stuff, .dixonschwabel.com, which is a compilation of the passions of our team members. If you go on our website, we have passion photos. So we kind of brought those to life. So people are sharing their favorite recipes, their favorite workouts, things they're doing with their kids. And that kind of just makes us stay connected to one another. So finding those flickers of your culture that you can extend remotely and keeping the norms has been really helpful for us.
Very cool. Thank you. Go to Jonathan.
I'd really echo what Kim said. Being very intentional about supporting a remote team is probably the key, and being thoughtful and planning. Declare how you're going to communicate so that people can communicate with you. And like you said, with your all staff meetings, we do something very similar. We actually do something that feels a lot more like something that you would produce for television. We actually have a production team, and we've got people who are cued in and graphics and the whole 9 yards, because we know that people are easily distracted and they're sitting at their desks, and you still want to do a good job communicating, and you have to work a little bit harder for that.
Great. Jeff, final thoughts?
Just that I think we're probably like others in that we feel very fortunate in this kind of time. There are a lot of folks that are not going through, they're having struggles, businesses and personal struggles combined. And to the extent that any of us can help them, I think it's great. I think we all have charities we probably know and support. What we're looking for is direct giving opportunities and others like that might have an impact on non-traditional stuff. That's why I asked about the broadband access. If there's other things out there that people know that we can do as a community to help each other, I'd love to hear about it. I think that we should encourage that kind of thing too.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Thank you, audience members, for your wonderful questions. Thank you, panelists. And I'm going to turn it over to Susan George to close us out.
She's muted.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists, Jeff, Kim, Jonathan, for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate your insight on this topic. It was very informative. If any of you have future topics of interest, please get in touch with me and we'll try our best to accommodate them. Once again, thank you to our series sponsor, the College at Broadband, and webinar sponsor, 5 Star Bank. Special thanks to my teammate, Janie Fisher, for all her help on the back end of this webinar. Thank you very much. Again, don't forget to visit our website, greaterrochesterchamber.com. And on behalf of our CEO, Bob Duffy, and the entire chamber team working hard to serve our members, thank you so much for your support. Have a good rest of the day, and thanks again.
Thank you, guys.